Welcome to the beautiful Ribble Valley. This is the village of Downham, scene of a most dastardly deed that took place in the year 1612. To our left we have the panoramic views of Pendle Hill. It looks tranquil, it looks peaceful, but way back in 1612, Pendle Hill and the surrounding villages were subject to one of Great Britain's most famous witch trials, the Pendle Witch Trials of 1612. These beautiful villages haven't changed in years. They're certainly great tourist attractions. Now, when it comes to stories of witchcraft and indeed religion, the Ribble Valley is probably the top of the Premier League, really. Just behind me we have Pendle Hill, and a gentleman called George Fox made his way into Pendle Hill, sat down and had a vision of a brand new religion. That religion was called the Quaker movement. So we have witches, we have brand new religions, and the story of the Pendle Witches. Pendle Hill has been described as being hypnotic, seductive, but also extremely atmospheric, as you can see. So here we are at Newchurch in Pendle, the very, very epicentre of the Pendle Witch story. This is Newchurch Cemetery, where our story really does begin. But we'll turn the clock back to the year 1612, and not too far from here, on Pendle was an area known simply as Malkin Tower, the home of the Demdike family, consisting of an elderly lady called Demdike, her daughter Elizabeth, her three children, James, Jeanette and Alison Devise. These people didn't work for a living, they begged, and if people didn't give them any money, they would curse them, and people were dying of mysterious ailments. Here in Newchurch lived a lady called Bessie Chattox and her daughter Anne Redfern. Like the Demdikes, like the Devises, they also begged for a living. Alison was found guilty of laming a peddler, and she admitted to being a witch. She incriminated her grandmother. She also brought Bessie Chattox and her daughter Anne Redfern into the story, and they were all sent to the city of Lancaster. On Good Friday 1612, the other so-called witches met at this area known as Malkin Tower, the home of the Demdike family. There James slaughtered the sheep off the fells and they consumed the sheep's flesh. They brought a huge cooking vessel out called a cauldron, lit a fire beneath it, and the black syrupy liquid began to bubble and steam. And into the air went huge volumes of steam. Into that cauldron went the odd crushed tooth, the odd human scalp, and indeed the odd clay effigy. After this event took place, Roger Noel, the local magistrate, sent a gentleman called Henry Hargreaves to investigate Malkin Tower. There he met young James Devise, Alison's brother, and he unearthed a clay effigy. They say the clay effigy had human teeth, and indeed human hair, which had come from this very, very cemetery. So the whole story of the Pendle Witches now opens. Roger Noel, the local magistrate, had everyone rounded up that had been at the Good Friday meeting of 1612 that took place on the 20th of April. Some of them disappeared, never to be heard of again, but the rest were all found and sent to Lancaster, with the exception of one young girl called Jeanette Preston. Jeanette came from Gisborne. Gisborne was in West Yorkshire, so she was sent to the city of York and found guilty of witchcraft. The other 11 were sent to Lancaster. Demdike died before the trials began, but she did admit to getting out of bed in the early hours of the morning and visiting this very cemetery, and there she would dig and take items from the corpses, etc. The other 10 were all found guilty of witchcraft. They consisted of John and Jane Bulcock, farmers from Blacko, Kathleen Hewitt of Colne, Alice Nutter of Roughlee, James Devise, Alison Devise, Bessie Chattox, Anne Redfern, and a real hero of the whole story, Alice Nutter. Along with them was a lady called Isabel Roby. She came from Windle in St Helens. She wasn't a member of the Pendle Witch trio, but she was certainly found guilty with them. And they were all executed on the 20th of August 1612 in front of huge crowds at Lancaster Castle. The one thing the witches have done, of course, is brought a huge amount of tourism to this part of the world. And it's one of those stories that just doesn't die away. In fact, this year will be the 400th anniversary of the Pendle Witches. Towns such as Burnley celebrate with 12 double-decker buses, all named after the famous 12 witches. Of course, for me personally, as a tour guide, I find the real criminal here was none other than King James VI of Scotland, who then became King James I of England. He wrote a book of demonology, and that book was all about his own personal paranoia relating to witchcraft. Sadly, his paranoia condemned those 12 to death. Now, as far as buildings surviving from that period of time, we've got Lancaster Castle, we have the home of Jeanette Preston in Gisborne, we also have Alice Nutter's house behind us. Now, out of all the witches, she was the most famous, the most loved, if you will, because she, at the trials, didn't say a word apart from not guilty. It's said that she was a very brave woman, and it's also said, but not documented, that she may have been falsely incriminated by Roger Nowell because of her arguments with regards to land disputes. In those days, women weren't allowed to have a brain, women weren't allowed to actually possess a brain, and she was having none of this, and she used to complain about land disputes, and she won every case fairly and squarely. It's said, but not documented, that Roger Nowell did in fact get the youngster of his children, Jeanette, to falsely incriminate her as being one of those people at the Good Friday meeting of 1612.